When we think about betrayal, we often imagine it happening in secrecy behind closed doors with strangers, but so often it begins in the most ordinary of places, the workplace, the place where we spend most of our waking hours, the place where relationships are built not with intention but through proximity. When she begins to cheat with a co-worker, it rarely looks like a dramatic love affair. It begins with small signs, little shifts that can easily be dismissed until they are impossible to ignore. She mentions him too often or avoids his name completely, and this is one of the earliest and most revealing signs that something deeper may be happening, because language is never neutral. The way she speaks about someone tells you how much space they occupy in her inner world. When a co-worker begins to appear in her stories more than anyone else, it is not necessarily betrayal, but it signals a emotional presence that should not be overlooked. You may notice how his name becomes woven into the fabric of her daily narrative, how every anecdote from the office somehow involves him, how she shares his jokes, his frustrations, his achievements with a level of detail that goes beyond ordinary professional rapport. And while at first it may feel like harmless storytelling, over time it begins to sound like admiration. It begins to sound like someone whose presence has become more significant than casual. And when that happens, you are no longer listening only to stories, you are listening to the slow rewriting of emotional priorities. There is a subtle difference between mentioning a colleague out of necessity and weaving them into every conversation. And when she does the latter, it begins to erode the intimacy between you, because her emotional investment is shifting elsewhere. She might laugh more when telling his stories than when engaging with yours. She might remember the smallest details about his day, yet forget the details about your own. And these small imbalances create a growing distance, not because she is intentionally pulling away, but because her attention is being redirected, and attention is the lifeblood of connection. At times, though, the opposite happens. Instead of his name appearing too often, it disappears completely. She suddenly avoids talking about certain aspects of her day. She becomes vague when describing her work environment. She glosses over interactions that used to be natural to share, and this absence is just as telling as the overexposure, because when someone goes out of their way to erase a presence, it usually means that presence carries weight. Avoidance is its own form of confession. It signals that there is something too charged, too significant, too risky to reveal, and so silence becomes a shield. Both overexposure and avoidance reveal the same truth. The co-worker is living rent-free in her mind. The relationship may not yet be physical, but it has already taken on emotional intimacy, whether it shows up as endless mentions or as careful omissions. Both are signs that he is not just another person in her orbit. He has become a focal point of her inner life, and the danger lies in how quickly emotional investment can grow once someone is allowed this much space in daily thought and conversation. When she speaks of him often, listen not only to the frequency, but to the tone. Does her voice carry admiration? Does she describe him with fondness that borders on reverence? Does she remember what he likes, what he struggles with, what he dreams about? Because remembering these things signals a level of emotional closeness that goes beyond casual work talk. And if she avoids his name, notice how the gaps in her stories feel unnatural, how the details are blurred, how she skips parts that once were freely shared. Secrecy is not only about lies, it is also about omissions, and the absence of his name in her narrative can be as loud as constant repetition. What makes this sign particularly important is that it is easy to dismiss at first. You may tell yourself that it is only work, that it is normal to have close colleagues, that it is harmless to share stories from the office. But over time you begin to feel it. You feel subtle shift in energy. You feel the admiration in her tone or the discomfort in her silence. You feel that the presence of this person is altering the way she relates to you. And the worst part is not the stories themselves, but what they represent. They represent a growing intimacy that is slowly being taken out of your relationship and placed elsewhere. She may not even realize what she is doing at first. She may not notice that she is mentioning him too often or avoiding him too deliberately. She may not recognize that her stories are now laced with longing, or that her silences are hiding attachment she does not want to admit to herself, but the unconscious always reveals itself in patterns, and the pattern of how she uses his name, or does not use it, is one of the clearest signals that something has shifted over time. These patterns create distance between you because you begin to feel like an outsider to her inner world. You feel like her most vivid conversations are happening elsewhere. You sense that her laughter, her frustrations, her admiration are being shared with someone who is not you, and this realization plants seeds of doubt and insecurity because intimacy is built on being the chosen confidant, and when that role is quietly transferred to someone else, even in words, it feels like betrayal. It is not the stories alone that matter, it is the energy beneath them. It is the way his name carries weight, it is the way her avoidance creates silence, it is the way the presence or absence of this person begins to shape the rhythm of your own conversations. When she mentions him too often, or avoids his name completely, she is showing you that her attention is no longer neutral, and where attention goes, desire often follows, and so what may seem like small details in conversation are in fact the first cracks in the structure of trust. This is why listening closely matters, because her words reveal her attachments, and her silences reveal her secrets. The truth of her inner world is written not only in what she shares, but in what she withholds, and if you are paying attention, you will hear the difference between ordinary work talk and the beginnings of an emotional affair. She mentions him too often, or avoids his name completely. And in either case, it is not about the words themselves, it is about the intimacy they signal, the presence of someone else living quietly in the space that once belonged only to you. She puts unusual effort into her appearance before work. And while on the surface this can look like a simple desire to feel good about herself, the deeper reality often speaks of a shift in who she is choosing to impress, because patterns reveal themselves over time, and when her energy in the morning suddenly transforms from routine preparation to a kind of ritual, it is worth paying attention. Perhaps you notice that where she once reached for comfortable clothes, she now gravitates toward outfits that are more fitted or flattering. Perhaps makeup that was once reserved for evenings out becomes part of her weekday mornings. Perhaps she lingers in front of the mirror with a focus that feels charged with anticipation. And while it is true that anyone can want to look their best, the context in which this new effort emerges begins to tell a story. When a woman redirects her attention to appearance in a way that coincides with her time at work, it can be an indicator that someone in that environment has sparked her desire for validation. Attraction often finds expression in the smallest rituals and the way she dresses or styles herself before stepping into that space becomes part of how she prepares to be seen. It is not just about clothes or makeup. It is about intention, the intention to attract, to be noticed, to be admired. And when that effort does not seem to extend toward you at home, but is concentrated in the hours she spends away from you, the imbalance raises questions. It is not unusual for people in relationships to go through phases of self-improvement. Perhaps she is exploring new fashion or reclaiming confidence in her body, but when the energy of her transformation is tied directly to her work routine and not shared moments with you, the focus becomes harder to dismiss. Maybe she rushes less when leaving in the morning because she takes the time to perfect her look. Maybe she chooses outfits that she would never have considered before. Maybe she shops more often, and her wardrobe slowly shifts into something more alluring rather than simply professional. These are subtle but meaningful signs of her wanting to be perceived differently by someone other than you. Often, it is not only the visible changes, but the energy she carries with them. There is a new excitement in her mornings, a new spark in the way she prepares herself. She might hum as she gets ready. She might seem lighter, more alive before heading to work. And yet, when she comes home, she quickly sheds that energy, leaving behind a version of herself that feels flat by comparison. This duality reveals where her anticipation truly lies, because effort in appearance is often tied to the audience it is meant for, and if you are no longer that audience, the signs of a shifting attention become clear. The effort in appearance can also show itself in subtle details. She might begin wearing perfume every day, not for herself, but for the possibility of proximity. She might invest in small accessories that draw attention. She might style her hair differently with an extra layer of care. And when these patterns emerge not once but consistently, they suggest that her mornings are not only about preparing for work, but about preparing for someone at work. Attraction fuels intention, and her body language in the mirror will often speak louder than her words. She is not simply dressing, she is presenting. This effort becomes even more telling when contrasted with her energy at home. You may notice that when it is time to go out together, she no longer invests the same enthusiasm. The lingerie she once wore for you now stays folded in drawers. The sparkle she once carried into shared evenings is reserved for mornings before work. And while these changes can be explained away as phases or moods, the consistency of them paints a different picture. Desire is not gone, it is simply being redirected. It is also important to pay attention to how she reacts when you notice these shifts. If she becomes defensive, if she dismisses your observations too quickly, or avoids answering questions about why she is suddenly investing so much in her appearance, it can signal that there is a deeper motivation she does not want to acknowledge, because loyalty thrives in transparency, while disloyalty thrives in secrecy. And when her transformation is shrouded in vague explanations like "just because" or "I felt like it," without the openness to share more, it is often because she herself knows the attention is not innocent. This new level of effort can be intoxicating for her because it awakens parts of herself that perhaps had been dormant. She might feel more desired, more alive, more seen when she steps into the space where this co-worker is present, and so the act of preparing herself becomes part of the excitement of anticipation. In those moments, she is not only dressing her body, she is dressing her longing, and though she may not admit it outwardly, her actions are the language of her inner world. The heartbreak of this shift is not only in the effort itself, but in what it symbolizes, because appearance is never just surface. It is communication. It is about who we are hoping will look at us, and how we want them to look at us. And when she begins putting unusual effort into her appearance before work, it is a silent confession that she is seeking attention in a place where she should be seeking it from you. It is not that she no longer desires to be admired, it is that the direction of her desire has changed, and the mirror in the morning becomes the stage where her secret is rehearsed over time. This pattern becomes impossible to ignore, because the human heart reveals itself in habits, and when the habit is dressing with care for someone else's gaze, the relationship you share begins to feel the absence of that energy. She puts unusual effort into her appearance before work, not because she has changed suddenly, but because her attention has shifted, and her desire to be desired is being fueled by eyes that are not yours. And that is why such a sign, though subtle, carries such weight, because the body always speaks the truth even when the lips stay silent. She becomes protective of her phone and messages during work hours, and while at first it may seem like nothing more than a desire for privacy, the shift in how she relates to her devices often tells a deeper story, because when trust is intact, phones are simply tools, but when boundaries suddenly harden around them, they become barriers. The small changes are the ones that stand out. She might begin placing her phone face down on the table when she never used to. She might take it with her into the bathroom when before it was left unattended. She might silence her notifications or quickly swipe away messages when you glance in her direction. These are not random habits. They are rituals of concealment, and every ritual has meaning. What makes this sign particularly revealing is not only the behavior itself, but the energy that comes with it, a defensiveness that feels disproportionate to the situation. If you casually reach for her phone to check the time, and she reacts sharply if you ask an innocent question about who she is texting, and she deflects with irritation or laughter that does not quite land if she guards her screen as though it holds secrets too fragile to expose. These are not neutral responses, they are signs of a world she is keeping separate from you. And secrecy does not thrive in spaces of trust. It thrives where something is being protected, not for privacy but for preservation. During work hours, the phone often becomes the channel through which emotional affairs are nurtured, because constant availability fuels intimacy. She might suddenly be more engaged with her phone in the evenings, responding quickly to messages with a smile. She tries to hide, she might linger on her device long after work is done, explaining that she is handling tasks or following up with colleagues, yet the attention feels different, it carries a charge. You can sense the difference between professional obligation and personal excitement. The body gives it away, the way her eyes soften, the way her lips curve ever so slightly. When a message arrives, the way she tilts the screen away when you walk near. It is not unusual for people to want privacy in their digital lives, but when that privacy begins to build walls between you, it signals something more. Her protectiveness over her phone becomes symbolic of her protectiveness over an intimacy. She is not sharing with you. Loyalty does not require full access to every message, but it does require the absence of fear. If nothing is hidden, nothing needs to be protected so fiercely. And when she begins to hold her phone like a secret, it is because it has become one. What deepens the wound is not simply the concealment, but the redirection of her energy. You notice she is distracted during conversations with you. Her attention drifts to the glowing screen. Her laughter comes more easily when responding to someone else than when engaging with you. The intimacy that once lived in eye contact across the dinner table now lives in the constant back and forth of typed words with someone you cannot see. Though the relationship may not be physical, the betrayal is already unfolding because her emotional presence has shifted. The protectiveness often extends beyond the phone itself to her explanations around it. She may suddenly over-justify her use of it, insisting it is all about work. She may dismiss your concerns with statements meant to shut down curiosity, like "Why are you being paranoid?" or "You don't trust me." And these reactions are designed not to clarify, but to deflect, because transparency does not fear questions, only secrecy does. When the truth is innocent, it can be spoken openly. When it is not, it hides behind irritation and avoidance. This sign is painful because it often makes you doubt yourself. You begin to question whether you are imagining things, whether you are overreacting, whether you are being controlling. And in that doubt, she finds protection, because secrecy thrives when the other person feels guilty for noticing it. But your unease is not paranoia, it is your intuition recognizing that intimacy has shifted into hidden spaces, and the phone has become the container of that shift. Over time, her protectiveness can create a new kind of distance, not just emotional, but physical. She might step outside to take calls, she might angle her body away while typing, she might leave the room under the guise of needing quiet to focus. And each of these small actions adds another layer of separation until you feel like an outsider in your own relationship. The person you once knew so intimately now seems to be living a life that is unfolding just out of your reach. And the phone becomes the doorway. You are not allowed to open. This behavior is not about the device itself, but about the intimacy it represents, because relationships are built on shared worlds. And when one partner begins to build a private world protected behind passwords and guarded screens, it is not simply about independence, it is about exclusion. She is no longer letting you into the spaces where her thoughts, emotions, and desires are being shared. She is giving those parts of herself to someone else and guarding them from you. She becomes protective of her phone and messages during work hours, not because the messages are about spreadsheets or deadlines, but because they are about connection. They are about laughter and longing. They are about emotional presence that has slipped away from you and found a new home in someone else's inbox. And though she may not admit it, her actions reveal it. Secrecy always reveals itself in the way it is guarded. And the way she shields her phone is her silent confession that there is something on it. She does not want you to see something that would make clear the disloyalty. She is not ready to speak aloud. She shows emotional investment in work stories that revolve around him. And this is one of the most subtle yet revealing signs, because it is not about what she says, but about how she says it. The energy behind her words carries a charge that is unmistakable. When someone has entered her emotional landscape, she cannot help but bring him home through her stories. What might have begun as ordinary workplace chatter starts to take on more color, more detail, more emotion. She speaks of his struggles as though they are her own. She defends his choices as though she has a stake in them. She celebrates his wins with a pride that feels disproportionate, and she recalls his jokes with a kind of glow that makes you feel like you are witnessing something intimate. The emotional investment is visible in the way she prioritizes his presence in conversation. She may rush to share what happened with him before she even asks about your day. She may retell his words with perfect memory, highlighting his wit, his kindness, his frustrations, as though she has been holding them in all day just to release them to you. It is not the story itself that matters, but the weight it carries. Her voice softens when she speaks of him. Her face lights up when she recounts interactions with him. Her energy shifts from tired or indifferent to alive and engaged. The very mention of him changes her over time. These stories start to take up space in your relationship. Space that used to belong to the two of you now becomes occupied by the emotional residue of someone else. You find that conversations which once revolved around your shared experiences have been replaced by endless tales from her work life, and though it may seem harmless, what it really means is that her emotional intimacy is being directed outside of the relationship, because emotional investment is not about who she spends her hours with, but about who she spends her heart with. And if he occupies her thoughts long after the office lights go out, then he is no longer just a colleague. This investment can show itself in subtle comparisons. She might mention how he listens to her ideas, how he appreciates her perspective, how he notices the little things she does, and though she may not say it outright, the contrast hangs in the air between what she receives from him and what she feels she does not receive from you. Her admiration for him becomes a silent critique of you, and the more she invests in that admiration, the greater the distance between you becomes, because admiration is the foundation of attraction, and once it takes root, it begins to grow quietly beneath the surface. Another way this sign reveals itself is through repetition. You notice that she tells the same stories about him more than once, not because you did not hear them the first time, but because she cannot let them go. They live in her mind, replaying themselves and spilling out in conversation over and over again. This repetition is not about the content, but about the fixation. When someone takes up so much mental space, they begin to show up repeatedly in the stories we share, and it is this persistence that betrays the depth of her investment. Her emotional attachment becomes even clearer when her empathy for him seems stronger than her empathy for you. If you share a struggle, she listens with distraction, but when his challenges come up, she leans in with attentiveness. If you celebrate an achievement, she offers brief acknowledgement, but when he succeeds, she retells it with excitement and detail. Her emotions are not neutral, they are being allocated with care. And when her heart chooses to engage more deeply with someone else's experiences than with yours, the relationship is already being compromised. What makes this sign so painful is that it is often minimized. She might insist that you are overthinking, that he is just a friend, that she is only venting about work, but you can feel the difference because emotional energy is impossible to fake. You sense that she lights up for him in ways she no longer lights up for you, and that truth is not in the words she uses, but in the glow she cannot hide. No matter how ordinary she tries to make it sound, her admiration slips through in her tone, her joy in the details, her eagerness to talk about him. Emotional investment is not always intentional. Sometimes it begins as camaraderie, as shared laughs in stressful moments, as support in long hours at the office, but over time the connection deepens because intimacy often grows in proximity, and before she realizes it, her emotional loyalty has shifted from you to him. The danger lies in the fact that she may not even call it cheating, because there is no physical act to point to, and yet her heart has already begun to step outside the relationship, and the stories she shares are the trail of that step. What hurts the most is not that she tells these stories, but that you no longer feel like the primary recipient of her emotional presence. She is still talking to you, but the substance of her intimacy is about someone else. She is still sitting across from you, but her inner world is turned elsewhere. She is giving you the surface while giving him the depth, and this imbalance leaves you with the ache of knowing that what used to be shared between you has been quietly Transferred to another, she shows emotional investment in work stories that revolve around him, and while the stories themselves may sound harmless, the truth is that her emotions are not harmless. They are revealing, they are pointing to where her desire, her admiration, and her attention now live and in. Relationships, attention is everything. Once it begins to consistently flow towards someone else, what remains between you starts to wither because intimacy cannot survive on leftovers. It requires the fullness of presence, and when her emotional investment is spent elsewhere, it is already a form of betrayal, no matter how softly it disguises itself in conversation.